said he threw her onto the table like a busted flush, like she was worth less than the pot he was chasing. Then the man who won her tore the winning hand to pieces in front of every miner in the room and told the saloon keeper the debt was finished, that no one would speak of her that way again. The snow had been falling since noon, the dry, stinging kind that Kavanaugh Gulch got in January, the kind that turned boot leather to stone and froze the slop buckets solid behind the saloon by dark. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and unwashed wool, and the stove in the corner popped and hissed against a cold that came up through the floorboards no matter how high the fire was fed. She was in the back, near the kitchen doorway, where she always stood on nights like this, close enough to hear when a man wanted more whiskey, far enough to not be looked at directly. Her hands were red from washing glasses in water gone lukewarm an hour ago. She had learned, in the 2 years since her husband died of the fever that took half the camp with him, that a woman kept alive by her husband's brother's charity did well to make herself useful and small at the same time. The saloon owner did not think of it as charity. He said so, loud enough for the room, most nights when the whiskey loosened something mean in him. "Dead weight," he called her. "My brother's leavings." He said it the way a man complains about a mule that eats too much and pulls too little, and the miners laughed because that was easier than not laughing. The visiting cattleman had come in from the southern ranges 3 days before, buying stock, keeping to himself, a big man who took up a whole side of the bar without seeming to notice he was doing it. He had watched the saloon owner needle her twice already that week and said nothing. He was not a talker. It was near midnight when the cards turned bad for the saloon owner, and worse for his temper. He had nothing left to put in the pot but a claim on a mule already sold and a debt already owed. So he named her instead, said it plain, like a man naming a hog for slaughter, and shoved back from the table to watch the room go quiet. She did not move from the doorway. She had learned that too. That stillness cost her less than protest ever had. The cattleman looked at his cards for a long moment, looked at her once, briefly, the way a man might check the weather before a ride. Then he called the hand, and won it clean. 3 kings against a pair the saloon owner had been bluffing on since the first bet. The room waited for him to collect. Instead, he set the cards face up on the table, took them one at a time between his thick fingers, and tore them down the middle. 3 weeks before that hand was dealt, the snow in Kavanaugh Gulch had not stopped falling long enough for anyone to remember what the road looked like underneath it. The town sat in a fold of the mountains like something dropped and forgotten there, a scatter of clapboard buildings, a stamp mill that never quite stopped groaning, and the saloon at the center of it all, its windows fogged yellow with lamp oil and breath. Men came off their shifts with their eyebrows rimed white and their hands too cold to feel the coins they paid with. The cold did not visit Kavanaugh Gulch. It lived there. She rose before any of them, in the room off the kitchen that had been a storage pantry before it became hers. The floor was dirt still, packed hard and swept smooth by 4 years of her own feet. She built the fire first, always the fire first, because a saloon without heat, by 6, was a saloon that lost its breakfast trade to the boarding house down the street, and the saloon owner had made it clear more than once that he did not intend to lose anything to the boarding house. She cooked for 40 men some mornings, beans and salt pork and biscuits she made from memory, because the recipe had died with her husband along with most everything else she'd once had a claim to. She scrubbed the floor of tobacco spit and mud. She hauled water until her shoulders ached in a specific, familiar way she no longer thought of as pain, only as Tuesday or Thursday or whatever day it happened to be. And in the evenings, after the supper crowd thinned and the saloon owner disappeared into his ledgers with a bottle at his elbow, she found the mistakes. Small ones, at first. A column that didn't sum. A delivery of flour logged at a price no mill in the territory charged. She had kept books for her husband's freight business once, back before the fever took him and left her a debt instead of a dowry, and the habit had never quite left her hands even after everything else had been taken from them. She did not point the errors out. She corrected them quietly, in her own small hand, in a second ledger she kept beneath a loose floorboard beneath her cot, not to expose anything, only because a mind like hers could not leave a wrong number sitting there unattended, the way another woman might not leave a crooked picture on a wall. Nobody had asked her to do this. Nobody knew she did it. The saloon owner called her useful, when he called her anything at all, and useful was the word he used the way another man might say. Furniture. She had stopped listening for warmth in it. She had learned, that winter, to take her worth in small private proofs, a ledger balanced, a fire that did not go out, a room of hungry men fed, and to keep them to herself, the way she kept the second book beneath the floor, waiting, though she did not yet know for what. She had married at 19, in a church with a leaking roof, to a man who sold dry goods out of a wagon and believed, with the stubbornness of the truly kind, that a woman with a good head for figures was worth more than one with a pretty face. He had said as much on their wedding night, plainly, the way he said most things, and she had laughed, because she had never heard it put so honestly before. 10 years they had kept accounts together, at a little counter, in a little store, in a little town, that no longer existed on any map worth drawing. He had taught her the columns. She had taught him patience with the columns, since his hand was heavier than his mind for numbers. It had been, she thought later, the only decade of her life in which she had been looked at and not merely looked over. He had died in the autumn of 1873, in a room that smelled of camphor and burnt tallow, coughing into a cloth she washed and rewashed until her hands cracked from the lye. He was 31, she was 29. The fever took him in 11 days, and when it was done, it left behind not the modest inheritance she had expected, but a stack of debts he had never mentioned, co-signed in a moment of brotherly trust to the very man who would later call her useful. The brother-in-law had come to the funeral in a black coat too tight across the shoulders and had wept, briefly, convincingly, and had told her afterward, over the coffin still warm with the smell of the church, that family looked after family. She had believed him for the length of a winter. By spring she understood that looking after meant a cot in the storeroom behind the saloon he had bought with her husband's debts, and meals eaten standing, and a ledger she was permitted to keep because someone had to, and she came cheaper than a clerk who expected wages. 6 years of it now. 6 years of hauling water before dawn, of scrubbing floors slick with tobacco spit and spilled whiskey, of cooking for men who did not look up from their cards to thank her, of being spoken of in the third person in rooms where she stood in the first. She had learned to make herself small in the particular way that large women are taught to make themselves small, apologetically, efficiently, as though her body itself were an inconvenience she owed the room compensation for. She had stopped expecting anything from the brother-in-law beyond what the ledger required of her. She did not stop, however, watching the numbers. And on the night the cattleman rode into town, with his hat still dusted from the trail, she was standing in her usual corner, dish rag over one shoulder, doing precisely that, watching the numbers, and waiting, though she still did not know for what. Duggan called her the arrangement when he introduced her to new men at the bar, as though she were a clause in a contract, rather than a woman standing 3 feet away with a rag in her hand. He did it that night too, tilting his head toward her without looking at her, the way a man gestures at a stove or a coat rack. The cattleman's eyes moved to her for half a second, then away, and she was grateful for the half second and ashamed of being grateful. She refilled glasses. She wiped the bar where the wood had gone soft and gray from decades of spilled drink. Duggan liked to talk while she worked, not to her but around her, the way a man narrates the weather. "She keeps my books," he told the cattleman, jerking his chin toward the ledger she'd left open near the till. "Cheaper than a clerk, doesn't eat much for her size, which I suppose is the one mercy in it." A few men near the bar laughed, not unkindly, just the reflexive laugh of men agreeing with whoever spoke last. She did not look up. She had trained her face for this exact sentence, and others like it, had practiced the particular stillness that let words pass through her without leaving a mark anyone could see. She had heard worse. She had heard, 3 winters back, a drummer from Denver asked Duggan if she came with the saloon or if he'd had to go find her special, and Duggan had laughed and said something about there being no shortage of women nobody else wanted. She had been carrying a stack of plates at the time. She had not dropped them. Tonight she carried a bottle of the good rye toward the far table, the one Duggan reserved for men whose money he respected, and set it down without spilling a drop. And Duggan said, not quite to her, "At least she's steady. Good for something, I suppose, if you don't mind looking at it." The cattleman's jaw moved once, some small motion she registered, but did not have time to name before she was called away to refill a lamp. She refilled the lamp. She swept a corner that did not need sweeping because it gave her hands something to do that was not listening. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the loose board over the window that Duggan had promised to fix for 2 winters running, and she thought, as she often did at this hour, of the ledger waiting on the shelf behind the bar, the numbers that made sense when nothing else in the room did, the columns that added up honestly even when the men around them did not. She had long since stopped hoping the night would be different. She only watched, now, the way she always watched. The cards, the whiskey, the shifting weight of men's attention, waiting for the moment, whenever it came, that the numbers stopped agreeing with what she was told they said. The old miner came in the way he always came in, stamping the snow off boots gone soft at the seams, and he did not call out for whiskey the way the others did. He waited by the end of the bar, where the wood had worn pale from his own elbows, patient as a man who had learned patience the hard way, in shafts where impatience got a body killed. She had seen him there most nights for longer than she could easily count, long enough that his silver stubble had gone fully white, long enough that his hands, cracked and blackened at the knuckle from years of rock and pick, had started to shake faintly when he lifted his cup. "Cold enough for you," he said, which was not a question so much as a kind of greeting, the way some men said good evening. She nodded and poured him his whiskey, and he did not tell her to hurry, and he did not remark on the width of her hips, or the plainness of her dress, or the fact that she was still standing there instead of married and gone somewhere else. He asked, instead, the way he always asked, "You eating enough?" No one had asked her that in years. Duggan asked if the stew was ready. The men asked when their drinks were coming. Her husband, before the fever took him, had asked her to fetch things, to mend things, to keep quiet when his brother was in one of his moods. But this old man, whose name she knew only as Hollis, because that was what the other miners called him, asked after her the way a person asked after another person, as if the answer mattered beyond what it could do for him. "Enough," she said, which was mostly true. He grunted, unconvinced, and reached into his coat and set down a twist of paper on the bar, and when she unfolded it there was a heel of dried apple inside, saved from some meal she guessed he could not entirely spare either. "Eat that," he said. "You look thin in the face." She had learned not to cry in the saloon. It was not a place that permitted it, not with Duggan watching for weakness, the way other men watched for cheats. So she only nodded and put the apple in her apron pocket and told him he oughtn't spend his coin on her, and he waved this off with the same hand that shook around his cup, and said something about how a man ought to look after the folks who kept his cup full and his boots dry of insult, and then he said no more about it, because that was the way he was. Kindness delivered plain and then folded shut, like a letter not meant to be reread. She was still turning that plainness over, the strange warmth of being asked after, when the cattleman rose from his chair across the room, and the whole saloon seemed to draw its breath in with him. Silas Voss did not rise the way other men rose in that room, with the scrape and bluster of chairs thrown back for effect. He simply stood, the way a wall might stand, unhurried, and the cards in his hand did not tremble. She watched him from her corner, with the apple still warm in her apron pocket, and beneath that small warmth was another, older thing, the thing she had not let herself look at straight in some while. It sat behind the bar in a place only she knew, wedged between a broken spittoon and a crate of bottles nobody counted anymore. A second ledger, her own, kept in a hand smaller and tighter than the one Duggan showed to the mine office. She had started it 2 winters back, telling herself it was only to keep her own accounting honest, so she would know what she had truly served and truly earned, since no one else troubled to know it for her. That was the reason she gave herself on the nights she wrote by lamp stub after the last drunk staggered home. But numbers do not lie the way people do, and hers had begun, some months in, to disagree with Duggan's in ways too regular to be accident. A dollar here that never reached the crate. A tally of drinks poured that did not match the coin taken. She had gone on writing anyway, telling herself it was nothing, that she was only keeping busy, that a woman ought to have some private thing that was hers alone, in a house where nothing else was. She had never shown it to a living soul. She had never fully asked herself why she kept it at all, only that some quiet, stubborn part of her had known, long before the rest of her would admit it, that a day might come when the truth of those numbers would matter more than her comfort in silence. Now, watching Voss unfold to his full height with the cards still fanned loose in his fingers, she felt that old ledger's weight in the room, the way she felt weather coming. Not seen yet, but known in the bones. Duggan's smile had gone thin and waxen at the edges. The dealer had gone still. Somewhere behind her, a chair creaked as a miner leaned forward, sensing, as she did, that something in the ordinary shape of the evening was about to be broken open. Voss looked down at his hand, then across at Duggan, then, briefly, at her. Not long, not soft, just a glance, plain as the apple had been plain, asking nothing and promising nothing. Then he set the cards face up on the table, one by one, unhurried as a man, laying out tools he meant to use. The room leaned in with him. The room leaned in with him, and for a moment, the whole saloon seemed to hold its breath around the sound of pasteboard settling on scarred wood. He had come into town 9 days before, on a gray morning with frost still crusting the ruts, driving 80 head of cattle down from the high pasture to sell before the passes closed. Word of him had traveled ahead the way word always did in a camp too small to keep secrets. A cattleman out of the wet mountain valley, unmarried, said to run his operation clean and pay his hands on time, which alone made him a curiosity among men who trusted no employer past payday. He had taken a room above the saloon because it was the only room to be had, and had settled his account with the stable and the mercantile in coin, counted twice, without complaint about the prices, though his eyes had lingered a beat too long on the mercantile's ledger before he signed his name beneath the total. He did not drink much, he did not talk much either, which in a town starved for new faces made him talked about all the more. He ate at the saloon's back table most evenings, always the stew, always cleaning the bowl the way a man does who has gone hungry enough in his life to remember it as a debt. She had served him twice before the game, and both times he had thanked her plainly, looked at her the way he might look at a fence line he was checking for weakness, and said nothing further. She had thought little of it. Men looked at her in all manner of ways that meant nothing. What she had not known, what no one in the saloon had troubled to know, was that he had spent those 9 days doing what he always did in a strange town before he spent money in it, watching. He had watched Duggan's hands at the bar, quick and practiced, skimming a coin here, shorting a pour there, small enough that a man half paying attention would never catch it, and small enough that a man paying full attention could not mistake it for anything else. He had watched the miners come in Friday nights with their pay already spent, twice over before the cards were dealt. And he had watched her, moving through the smoke and noise, with a stack of chits she alone seemed able to make sense of, her mouth flat, her eyes doing arithmetic nobody had asked her to do. Now the last card lay face up among the others, and Duggan's waxen smile had gone the color of old tallow. Voss did not smile at all. He looked at what he had won the way a man looks at a debt someone else had tried to pay him in counterfeit coin, and his fingers, broad and still, did not reach to gather the pot. The room waited on that stillness. Duggan's smile had frozen crooked, half of it still trying to work, as if the shape alone might change the outcome. Somewhere behind the bar, a glass clinked and stopped, as though even the noise knew better than to move. It had started with the flu. 3 days into his stay, smoke had backed up in the saloon stove until the whole room stung with it, and Duggan had cursed at it, the way he cursed at most things that required more thought than a shrug. She had come from the kitchen without being asked, sleeves rolled, and worked a bent length of wire up through the pipe until the draft caught again, coughing black flakes onto her apron. She had not announced it. She had gone back to the kitchen before the smoke even cleared, and only the easing of the room told anyone it was done. Then the coin, a miner, drunk past sense, had dropped a half-eagle in the sawdust, and staggered out without noticing. Voss had watched her cross the floor, pick it up, and set it on the bar under a chit, with the man's name already written on it in her hand, before Duggan, or anyone else, had so much as looked down. She had not pocketed it. She had not made a show of not pocketing it either. She had simply written the name and moved on, the way a woman moves who has done a thing so many times it no longer feels like virtue, only habit. And the tally. That was the one that had settled it for him. Duggan, 3 nights running, had called out a running sum from the ledger to needle a miner who doubted his own debt, rattling off figures with the practiced looseness of a man who expected no one to check his arithmetic. She had corrected him, once, quietly, from the corner, without looking up from the glass she was wiping, a single number, low and flat, and Duggan had blinked and recalculated aloud, and arrived, grudgingly, at her figure. He had not thanked her. He had barely acknowledged she'd spoken at all, but Voss had seen her mouth move before Duggan's did, working the sum a half-second ahead, effortless, the way some men could tell the hour by the slant of light without meaning to. He had said nothing of any of it. He had ordered his supper, paid for his room, played cards when cards were offered, and let the town believe he was only what he appeared to be, a cattleman passing through with money to lose. But he had catalogued her the way he catalogued cattle, and weather, and men who might cheat him, filing away each small proof until the pile of them stood taller than anything Duggan could say about her across a card table. Now the cards lay face up, and the room held its breath, and none of them yet understood that he had already made up his mind 9 days ago. The proof he needed came on a Thursday, though he did not know yet that he would need it at all. A miner stood at the bar, swaying with the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent 12 hours underground and meant to spend the rest of the night forgetting it. He set down a coin, called for whiskey, and did not watch his change the way a sober man would have. Duggan swept the coins together, counted them out again with the practiced speed of a man who had done this 10,000 times, and slid back less than he owed. Not much less, a few cents. The kind of theft small enough that a tired man would never notice, and large enough that, multiplied by every drink poured in a year, it built something. She was 3 feet away, restacking glasses, and she did not look up, but her hand moved. It found 2 coins from the tin she kept for her own wages Duggan called in advance and never seemed to advance, and set them on the bar's edge, near enough that the miner's fingers brushed them when he reached for his glass. He did not seem to notice the correction had happened at all. He pocketed the coins, muttered something that might have been thanks to no one in particular, and wandered off toward the stove to thaw his hands. She went back to the glasses. Voss had been watching from the far end of the bar, nursing a beer he did not want, and he understood in that moment that he had witnessed something rehearsed, not the theft, which was old, but the correction, which had the smoothness of habit. She had done this before, perhaps many times, quietly making right what her brother-in-law made wrong, without ever once raising her voice to say so, without ever once letting Duggan know his own ledger was being audited nightly by the woman he treated as furniture. He set his beer down. He did not confront Duggan. He did not say a word to her. He only watched her finish her circuit of the room, wiping the bar, banking the stove, moving through the smoke and noise like something that had long ago decided the only power left to her was the power to be exact, and to spend that exactness on strangers, who would never know her name, because it was the one form of dignity Duggan could not take from her without knowing he was taking it. He thought of the sum she had corrected days before. He thought of the coins now warming in a stranger's pocket. He thought, not for the first time, that a man who could not see what stood behind his own bar deserved to lose it, and that the losing might not take the shape Duggan expected. He finished his beer slowly, the way he did most things, and said nothing at all. The saloon owner came around the bar then, wiping his hands on his apron, and the smile he wore was the kind he used on men he owed money to, which the cattleman recognized because he had worn a version of it himself, years back, before he learned better. "You're not still sore about the flour," the saloon owner said. It was not a question. The cattleman said nothing, which was its own kind of answer, and the saloon owner laughed the laugh of a man who had decided to treat a debt as a joke because the alternative was to treat it as a debt. Back in the spring, before the frost had fully left the ground, The saloon owner had put in an order for flour and salt pork and 2 barrels of nails, promising payment on delivery, and the cattleman had fronted the freight cost himself because the supplier out of Denver would not extend credit to a saloon man with a reputation for slow paying. $41 it had come to, plus the $6 in freight the cattleman had covered out of his own pocket when the wagon broke an axle outside Golden and had to be repaired before it could finish the run. The saloon owner had paid $9 of it in June. He had paid nothing since. "I'll square it," the saloon owner said now, the way he had said it in June, and in July, and again in September, when the cattleman had last passed through, with a mind to collect, and found the saloon owner conveniently occupied with a shipment of whiskey that had, by the cattleman's math, cost more than the debt itself. "You keep saying that." "Business has been slow." The cattleman looked around the room, the full tables, the smoke thick enough to chew, the woman at the end of the bar counting bottles with her lips moving in silent arithmetic, and did not say what he was thinking, which was that business did not look slow to him, only that the money went places other than where it was owed. $32, the cattleman said. "Still, I know what I owe. Then owe it less." The saloon owner's smile thinned at the edges but did not leave his face entirely, because a man like that did not let a debt trouble his expression in front of a room, only in the private ledger of his own reckoning, which the cattleman suspected was kept far looser than the one the widow kept for him without pay or thanks. He filed the number away the way he filed most things, not forgotten, only set aside, the way a man sets aside a debt he intends to collect when the collecting will do the most good, rather than merely satisfy the wanting of it. He finished his beer. He set the empty glass down with a small, definite sound, the sound of a man closing a door rather than slamming it, and told the saloon owner he'd be back through before the month was out, and that the number wouldn't be getting smaller in his memory, no matter how the saloon owner counted it in his. The cattleman's boots had not cleared the door before the saloon owner's mood soured further, the way milk turns faster in a warm room. He poured himself another, though the bottle was nearly through, and did not offer any to the men still seated at his tables. He had a payroll debt of his own, coming due at the mine office by the 15th, a sum he'd borrowed against future takings that had not arrived in the quantity he'd promised himself they would, and the arithmetic of it sat on him now like wet wool. He looked toward the kitchen doorway, where she stood scraping a pot with more attention than the pot required, and something in him curdled at the sight of her steadiness. "You'd think," he said, to no one and everyone, "a man could turn a profit keeping a woman fed and housed for her cooking. You'd think there'd be some return in it." The men nearest him did not answer. They had heard this kind of talk before and knew it required no answer, only silence enough to let it run its course. "Eats plenty for a woman who does so little," he went on, and here his voice found the pitch he used for performing rather than speaking, the pitch meant to be heard past the bar and into the corners. "Can't say she's much use to look at neither. Man could do worse than a wife who cooks and keeps quiet, I suppose, if he didn't mind the rest of it." She did not turn from the pot. Her hands kept their rhythm, scrape and rinse, and if the words had landed anywhere in her, they did not show themselves on her back or her shoulders, which she held the way she held them every evening, neither bowed nor stiff, simply present. "Dead weight," he said, testing the phrase, finding he liked its shape in his mouth. "That's the trouble with taking in a brother's leavings. A man does it out of duty, and finds the duty don't end, only grows heavier each season, like a debt nobody agreed to owing." One of the miners, older, with coal still ground into the creases of his knuckles, glanced toward the kitchen doorway and then away again, uncomfortable in the manner of a man watching a door close on something he had no right to hold open. Nobody spoke for her. That was the arrangement of the room, unspoken but understood. The same arrangement that let a saloon owner say what he pleased about a woman working 12 feet away and call it conversation rather than cruelty. She set the pot down at last, dried her hands on her apron, and went to fetch more wood for the stove, because the stove did not care what was said over it and needed feeding regardless. The cold outside had teeth in it that night, the kind of cold that came down off the peaks early, and stayed, and she moved through it without complaint, the way she moved through most things, filing away what she'd heard in some private ledger of her own, the way a woman does, who has learned that a debt spoken aloud in a room full of men is still a debt, and debts, she had come to understand, were rarely forgotten by the ones who owed them. The wood was dry, at least. She had seen to that herself, stacking it under the eave where the snow couldn't reach it, and she carried an armload back through the rear door, with the cold still clinging to her sleeves. The saloon had filled while she was gone. She heard it before she saw it. Boots on plank floor, the particular scrape of chairs pulled close for a hand of cards, the low murmur that meant money was on the table. She set the wood beside the stove and straightened, and that was when the voice came, pitched louder than it needed to be for the men it was meant for. "She comes with the place," the saloon owner said, and there was a laugh in his throat that had no joy in it, only the ease of a man rehearsing a line he liked the sound of. "Cooks well enough, keeps the books tidier than I do, if a man can believe that. But you'll want to know she's damaged goods, buried a husband young, and never had the sense to remarry. Nobody's fool enough to take her on for anything but what she's good for." The room did not go silent. That was the cruelest part of it. The cards kept moving. Someone laughed at something unrelated 2 tables over. A glass rang against another glass. The words simply folded into the ordinary noise of the evening, as though they belonged there, as though a woman's worth being weighed aloud over a poker hand was no different from the weather being discussed. She did not turn around. She stood with her back half to the room, one hand still resting on the stovepipe, though it had begun to burn her palm, and she made herself finish the motion she had started, opening the damper, feeding a length of wood into the flame, because to stop, to flinch, to let her hands show what the words had done to her insides, would be its own kind of confession. Her face did not change. She had trained it not to, over years long enough that the training no longer felt like effort, only habit, the way a person learns not to wince at a familiar ache. But something in her chest went very still and very cold, colder than the night outside, a stillness that was not calm but its opposite, a held breath disguised as composure. Across the room, near the head of the table, the cattleman had gone quiet in a different way than the rest of them. He was not laughing, he was not looking at his cards, he was watching her back, the set of her shoulders, the small deliberate economy of her hands at the stove, and his jaw had tightened in a manner that had nothing to do with the hand he'd just been dealt. The old miner waited until the cards were dealt again, and the noise of the room had swallowed itself back into its usual roar before he came to stand near the stove, close enough that his words would not carry past the 2 of them. He was a small man, bent from 30 years underground, with hands that shook now in a way they had not shaken before the last hard winter. He held his coffee cup without drinking from it, using it the way a man uses a prop, something to look occupied by while he said what he had come to say. He did not look at her when he spoke. He watched the fire instead, as though the words were easier to release into the flame than into a face. He had worked the number 3 shaft 19 years, he said, and in that time he had learned to read a column of figures the way some men read scripture, not from schooling, but from repetition, from watching his own wages laid out often enough that the shapes of the numbers became familiar as a neighbor's face. And this past year, he said, the shapes had started to look wrong to him, not wrong enough that a tired man in a hurry would catch it, wrong the way a fence post leans before it falls, a degree at a time, so slow you doubted your own eyes more than the post. He had seen the saloon keep the shared ledger for the mine office, the one that reconciled the camp's payroll against what the company sent down from Denver twice a year. He had seen him alone with it more than once, of an evening when he thought the room was empty. Figures changed between the company's tally and the camp's books, small enough each time to be a clerk's error, but always in the same direction, always favoring the same set of hands. He set the cup down at last and looked at her directly, and there was no accusation in his face, only a weariness that seemed older than his years underground. He told her he did not know what she could do with such a thing, a woman with no standing in this town, no name of her own that men respected. He told her only that he had seen it, that he had said nothing, because a man his age could not afford to be run off from the only work left to his hands, but that it sat on him wrong, had sat on him wrong for months, and he did not want to die with it unspoken. He warned her, plainly, without softening it. A thing like that did not stay buried forever. Sooner or later the ground gave way over it, and when it did, it would not ask politely who stood nearest the hole. She thanked the old man for his trust and asked nothing more of him, understanding that a confidence given so plainly was not meant to be pressed. He rose slowly, joints cracking like green wood, and let himself out into the dark without another word, leaving her alone with the ledger and the cold coffee and the weight of what she now knew. 3 nights later, the saloon was loud with the particular restlessness of a man losing at cards. Duggan had been drinking since supper, and the drink had not softened him, only sharpened the edges of his temper. He'd lost twice to the cattleman already that week. Small hands, nothing that should have mattered to a man who owned half the town's vice, and yet each loss seemed to sit on him like a stone he could not set down. He kept glancing toward the corner where she worked the books by lamplight, as though her presence were somehow the cause of his luck turning, as though a woman keeping numbers straight could curse a hand of cards. He called for a fresh deck. He called for whiskey. He would not look at the cattleman directly, but he spoke to him sideways, the way a man speaks when he has already decided something shameful and needs the words to arrive before the shame does. "You've been sniffing round my business long enough," he said, watching, asking, like a man deciding whether to buy a horse he ain't paid for yet. The cattleman said nothing. He rarely did. "I owe you," Duggan went on, and here his voice thinned, took on the brittle brightness of a man trying to make a debt sound like an opportunity. "Owe you plain, from Tuesday's hand and the one before it. More than I care to carry through winter." He set his cards down, spread his hand flat on the table, as if presenting collateral. "So here's my stake, since you're so damned interested in what happens in my house. 1 hand. You win, the debt's paid, and you take her keep off my books besides. Feed her, work her, marry her for all I care. She's yours to manage from that table on." The room went quiet, in the way rooms go quiet before weather. She did not move from the corner. She kept her pen steady on the page, though the ink had begun to pool where she'd stopped writing, and she made herself watch the cattleman's face rather than Duggan's, because Duggan's face told her nothing she had not already learned to expect, and the cattleman's told her nothing at all, which was, she was beginning to understand, its own kind of answer. He gathered the deck without hurry. He did not look at her either, not yet, but something in the set of his shoulders had changed, some slow gathering of intent, like a man loading a rifle he has no plan yet to fire, only the certainty that he will need it before the night is through. The words hung in the smoke like something you could reach up and touch, and nobody in the room moved to touch them. She had heard men bet horses before. She had heard them bet mules, wagons, a season's worth of ore not yet pulled from the ground. She had not, until this moment, heard a man bet a woman with the same flat voice he'd use for a sack of flour, and some part of her recognized that this was not new so much as it was finally spoken plain, the thing that had been true since her husband died, and his brother had decided her debt to the world was a debt owed specifically to him. She kept her eyes on the page. The ink pooled darker. She did not expect the cattleman to refuse. Men who traveled with that much money folded into their boots did not refuse free things, and she had learned, 3 winters running, that the offer of rescue was a story town women told each other to make the nights shorter, not a thing that happened to women like her, heavy in the hips, and widowed, and known to everyone in 3 counties as Duggan's leftover trouble. She had stopped waiting for someone to walk through that door and see her as anything but ledger and labor. Waiting cost more than it paid. The dealer at the far table had stopped dealing. Somewhere behind the bar a glass set down too hard, and the sound of it seemed to travel the length of the room before anyone breathed again. She thought, distantly, of what she would pack if this went the way it always went. Not much. The shawl. The tin cup that had been her husband's. She had done this arithmetic before, in her head, on nights when Duggan's mood turned and she measured the distance to the door against the weight of what she owned. The cattleman shuffled once, twice, the cards whispering against each other like something almost gentle. He set the deck down square in front of himself, edges aligned, and only then did his eyes come up. Not to Duggan, not yet, but across the room to the corner, where she sat with her pen gone still, and her spine held the particular straight that women learn when they have decided that if they must be discussed like property, they will at least not slouch while it happens. He held her gaze for the length of one breath. Not kindness in it, not pity either. Something closer to a man taking inventory, weighing a thing he intended to bid on with his own money and no one else's opinion. Then he looked back at Duggan and reached for the cards and said nothing at all, which frightened her more than any promise would have, because promises could be broken cheap, and silence, in a man built like that, generally meant he had already decided what he was going to do. The dealer's hands moved with a slowness that made the room feel underwater. First card to Duggan, face down, sliding across the felt with a sound like a whisper being taken back. First card to the cattleman, same motion, same silence. The lamp above them guttered once, caught itself, threw a long yellow tongue of light across the table that made the shadows of both men's hands look larger than the hands themselves. Second card, third. Duggan peeked at his own cards, the way a man peeks at a wound he already knows is bad. Quick, wincing, unable to help himself. Something moved behind his eyes. A twitch at the corner of his mouth that he tried to smooth away and could not quite manage. She had watched him bluff 100 drunk miners out of their pay, and she knew what his face did when the cards were kind to him. This was that face. He had drawn something worth believing in. The cattleman did not look at his cards at all until all 5 were down, and when he did look, he looked once, briefly, the way a man checks the weather before deciding whether to bring in the wash. Nothing in his face moved. Not his jaw, not the set of his mouth, not the 2 lines between his brows that had been there since he sat down. He set the cards face down again and folded his hands over them and waited, as if he had all the patience in the territory and meant to spend every scrap of it right there. The room had gone quiet enough that she could hear the stove ticking as it cooled in the back, and somewhere beneath the floor, a rat working at something in the dark. Chairs creaked as men leaned forward without meaning to, the way bodies do when they sense a thing is turning, even before the mind catches up. Duggan's fingers drummed once against the table edge, stopped, drummed again. He had 3 of a kind now. She could see it in the particular stillness that came over greedy men right before they overplay a hand, a stillness that looked like calm, but was actually a man holding his breath so his luck wouldn't slip. He pushed forward the last of what he owned to push. His voice cracked once on the number, and he covered it with a laugh that convinced no one. The cattleman did not laugh. He did not smile. He matched the bet without counting it twice, the coins landing soft on felt gone dark and slick with spilled whiskey, and years of hands like these. Then he turned his cards, one at a time, slow enough that the whole room could watch the shape of the thing arrive before it was fully said aloud, and somewhere in that turning, she stopped breathing entirely and did not notice until her chest ached for it. Kings first, laid down like a man, setting a table for guests he did not expect, but had prepared for anyway. Then the 8s, 3 of them, black and red and black again, and the room made a sound that was not quite a gasp and not quite a groan, but something caught between the 2. The sound a crowd makes when it understands a thing has been decided before it fully understands what the thing is. A full house, kings over 8s. Duggan's 3 of a kind sat on the felt like a joke someone had told too late. Nobody moved. Even the lamp seemed to hold its flame steadier, as if the room itself had gone still to listen. Her hands found the edge of her apron and gripped it, though she could not have said why, only that some part of her needed something solid to hold while the floor of her life rearranged itself in front of a dozen strangers. The cattleman looked at his own cards for a long moment, not with triumph, with something closer to distaste, as though he had picked up a stone and found beneath it something he had not wanted to see. Then he reached forward, unhurried, and tore the cards in half. The sound was small. Paper does not tear loud, but in that silence, it carried the way a gunshot might have, and every head in the saloon turned toward it as though it had been fired. He tore them again, into quarters, and set the pieces down on the felt among the coins he had not touched. "Debts paid," he said. His voice was not raised. It did not need to be. "Full and done. You'll not speak her name over a card table again, Duggan. Not this table nor any other." Duggan's mouth opened, closed. His face had gone the color of ash left too long in a cold stove, and his eyes moved once toward her. Quick, ashamed, gone again before it could settle into anything a man might call remorse. "She's not yours to win, nor mine to lose," the cattleman went on, and now he did look at her, and something in his face was plain and unadorned, in a way that made her chest tighten worse than the silence had. She was never a debt to begin with. Man who thought so was never worth the table he sat at. Someone at the bar exhaled, long and low, as if he too had been holding his breath without knowing why. Duggan said nothing. There was nothing left in him to say, his winnings gone to torn paper, his authority gone with them, and in the eyes of every man watching, something else had gone too, something he would spend the rest of the season trying and failing to buy back. Ruth did not move from her corner. She could not yet trust her legs, nor her voice, nor the strange loosened feeling in her ribs where the breath had finally returned, uneven and burning. The cattleman rose from the table, collected nothing, and looked toward her as though the matter of what came next had already been settled in his mind long before the last card fell. He crossed the room slow, the way a man walks when he has already decided something and is only waiting for his boots to catch up with his mind. The floorboards took his weight without complaint, the way they had learned to over the years, and every eye in the saloon followed him, though no one dared speak into the space he was making. He stopped in front of her corner, close enough to talk plain, far enough that she would not feel cornered by him the way she had been cornered by everything else in that room for longer than she cared to count. "I've watched you a year," he said, "maybe more. Come through here on cattle business, sat at that bar, ate what you cooked when Duggan let you cook it, and I watched you mark figures in a ledger you thought nobody was reading over your shoulder." He paused. "You caught him skimming from the miners' accounts twice that I saw. Once in March, once again before harvest. You never said a word to anyone, just fixed the numbers quiet and let him think his own hand was steadier than it was." The room had gone strange and still, the kind of stillness that comes when a thing everyone half knew is finally said aloud by someone with nothing to lose in the saying. "I run cattle," he went on. "I don't run numbers well, and my foreman's worse than I am. I need a ledger kept honest. I can pay you for it. Wages, not keep, not a roof held over your head like it was charity. Work." He said the word like it carried weight, like he meant for her to feel the difference between it and every other arrangement that had ever been offered her in that town. Ruth found her voice before she found her feet under her, which surprised her more than the offer itself. "You'd trust a woman with your books." "I'd trust the woman who caught a cheat for a year and said nothing, because saying something would have cost her a roof." His jaw worked once, like the sentence had cost him something too. "That's not weakness, that's sense. I've got little enough of it around me as it is." Somewhere behind him a chair scraped, someone's boot shifted against the floor, but no one spoke against it. Duggan sat with his torn hands scattered before him like a hand of cards a child might have ruined in a temper, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing left in that room that belonged to him to say. She said yes before the room could change its mind for her. It took 2 days to leave, though she owned little enough that it might have taken 2 hours. There was the trunk her husband had carried west, its hinges gone soft with rust. There was a shawl, a good knife, a tin cup dented on one side from a fall-down porch steps years back. And there was the ledger, the real one, the one she had kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard behind the flour barrel, its pages close written in a hand too careful to belong to a woman with nothing to protect. She wrapped it in oilcloth and laid it at the bottom of the trunk beneath the shawl, where a careless hand would find only wool. The old miner watched her pack from the doorway of the room he rented above the mercantile, his breath coming thin and wet in his chest, worse than it had been a week before. He did not offer to help. His hands shook too badly for lifting now, and they both understood that without either of them saying it aloud. "You'll write," he said. not a question. "I'll write." He nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has decided something is settled and does not trust himself to say more about it. Outside, the wind had turned colder, carrying the first hard edge of the season down off the peaks. And somewhere down the street, a mule team was being cursed into motion. She latched the trunk. He watched her hands do it, steady where his were not. "Duggan give you any trouble?" "He hasn't spoken to me since." She did not say that he hadn't spoken to anyone since, that he sat most days at the same table, with the same torn cards, still scattered before him, as though sweeping them away would be admitting something he could not yet afford to admit. The old miner's cough took him then, doubling him against the doorframe, and it went on longer than she liked, long enough that she crossed the room and put a hand flat against his back the way she might have steadied a post about to lean. When it passed, he straightened, waved her off with more irritation than the moment called for, and told her the wagon was waiting. She did not argue with him. She had learned, in 11 years of watching men decide what weakness they would and would not permit themselves, that arguing only cost them more. At the door, she turned back once. He was still standing there, thinner than he'd been in summer, watching her the way a man watches something he helped build leave to become itself. "Go on," he said. "Ledger's no good to anybody sitting in a trunk." February came in hard, with a wind that found every gap in the ranch house walls and made a low complaint of it all night. She did not mind the cold so much as the silence it forced on her, the long hours at the kitchen table, with the ledgers spread before her like a map of a country she was only now learning to read properly. The ranch's books had been kept honestly, she found, but carelessly, sums added twice. A delivery of grain paid for on credit, and then paid for again in coin 3 weeks later, because no one had thought to check. She corrected what she found, and said nothing about it, only left the figures squared in the margin the way she'd once left them squared in another man's ledger for years, without anyone noticing the difference it made. It was the docked pay that told her she'd been seen without being watched. One of the hired hands, a boy of perhaps 19, who mucked stalls and mended fence, with a kind of grim cheer that made the older men fond of him, came up short $2 on his wages at month's end. He did not complain. He only stood by the barn, with his hat in his hands and an expression of a man deciding whether a thing was worth the trouble of mentioning. She noticed. She always noticed. She went back through the tally book and found the error. A week's labor recorded as 4 days instead of 6. A slip of someone's pencil, nothing more. And she brought it to the foreman herself, laid the numbers out plain, and did not raise her voice, because she had never needed to. The foreman paid the boy that same afternoon. Word of it moved through the bunkhouse the way word always moved on a ranch, quiet and thorough. And after that, the men nodded to her when she crossed the yard, not with the wariness they'd shown her first week, but with something closer to respect, the kind earned rather than granted. The cattleman kept his distance through all of it. He did not hover over her work, nor ask after her progress more than once a week, and when he did ask, it was brief, practical, a man inquiring after the health of an investment rather than the state of a woman's heart. He left food at her door some evenings, venison, dried apples, once a jar of honey with no note attached, and did not wait to be thanked for it. She understood the shape of the distance he was keeping. It was not indifference. It was the particular patience of a man who had learned that trust, once forced, was worth nothing at all, and who intended to let hers arrive in its own time, on its own legs. The message came on the 9th day of December, carried by a boy on a mule who had ridden out from the camp office with his collar turned up against a wind that cut like a blade honed on ice. He found her in the small room off the kitchen where she kept the ranch accounts, and he did not dismount before he spoke, as if the urgency in him could not wait for his own boots to touch ground. The payroll office was short, not by a little. The camp foreman had gone over the books 3 times and still come up $900 thin against what the mine's ore shipments should have paid out, and with the passes closing in another fortnight, there would be no way to freight in coin from Denver before the men went hungry through January. She read the note twice, standing in the doorway with the cold pouring in around her skirts. There was a second sheet folded inside the first, the handwriting on it shaking in a way she recognized. the letters dragging as if the hand that made them had grown too tired to lift the pen between words. The old miner who had first shown her how a column of figures could lie as easily as a man's mouth was dying. Everyone at the camp had known it was coming since the fever took hold of him in November, but knowing a thing and having it arrive were different weathers entirely. His message was short. He asked her to bring the true ledger forward now, before winter closed the roads, and before he closed his eyes for good, because he did not trust his memory to hold the truth of what he'd seen, if death came for him first, and left her standing alone, with only her word against a saloon owner's. She sat down at the small desk with the note still in her hand, and did not move for a long while. The boy waited outside with the mule, stamping his feet against the cold, until she came out again with her coat already buttoned, and her satchel packed with the pages she had carried out of that saloon, the night everything changed. The true figures beneath the false ones Duggan had shown the world for years. She did not send word ahead to the ranch house. There was no time for it, and no need. The cattleman would understand where she'd gone, once he found her chair empty and the account books closed. The ride to the camp took the better part of the afternoon, the mule's breath and her own rising together in the thin white air, and she spent every mile of it turning the old miner's words over like a coin worn smooth from handling, wondering if she would reach him before his voice went quiet for good. The payroll office sat at the far end of the camp, a plank building with a stovepipe leaning east from years of wind, and she reached it as the light was going gray and thin over the ridge. The superintendent was a narrow man with ink-stained cuffs who did not rise when she came in, only looked at her boots and her satchel, and asked what business a woman had coming to him, with ledgers instead of a husband to speak for her. She did not answer that. She set the pages on his desk instead, opened to the columns she had copied by lamplight in another life, and told him to compare them against whatever the saloon had reported to the camp for supply costs going back 4 winters. He did not want to. She watched him decide not to want to, watched the reluctance cross his face like a cloud passing, and she simply waited, the way she had learned to wait through worse than a clerk's vanity. Eventually he took up the pages, because the alternative was admitting he was afraid of what they held. It took him the better part of an hour, and the payroll agent came in halfway through and stood reading over his shoulder without a word, and by the time they finished, neither man was looking at her boots anymore. The discrepancy was not small. 4 years of flour and salt pork, billed at prices no supplier in the territory charged, the difference pocketed, and the camp's account bled thin, a little at a time. So slow, no single season had ever shown it plainly. Only her numbers, laid beside his false ones, made the shape of the theft visible all at once, like a bruise coming up under skin. The superintendent asked, quieter now, how she had come to have such figures at all. She told him plainly. She had kept those books herself, in that saloon, for 6 years, long before anyone thought to ask what she noticed while she worked. He asked if she would swear to the accuracy of them before the camp's committee, if it came to that. She said she would swear to every line, and that the old miner dying up on the ridge would swear to what he had seen the night the false numbers were made, if someone rode fast enough to reach him first. The payroll agent was already reaching for his coat. Outside, the light had failed almost entirely, and the cold had teeth in it now, and she stood a moment on the step, letting the wind take the breath from her before she went back out into it, toward the mule, toward the ridge, toward whatever was left of the truth still breathing up there in the dark. The ride to the ridge took the better part of an hour, the mule stumbling twice on ice she couldn't see, her hands gone stiff on the reins long before the cabin's black shape rose against the last gray light. The old miner was awake. Barely. His breath came in a thin whistle now, a sound like wind finding a crack in a wall, and when she knelt beside the bunk and told him the superintendent had seen the books, had believed her, was already sending men to the saloon to seize what remained of the false ledgers, something in his face eased that had not eased in weeks. He asked her to say it again, slower. She said it again, slower. She told him the theft would be named publicly, that the miners would see their own wages returned to them in the spring reckoning, that no one would call him a liar for what he'd witnessed the night the numbers were changed. He nodded, and his hand found hers on the blanket. and he held it the way a man holds a rail, going down a steep grade, not for warmth but for the certainty of it being there. He died 3 nights later, before the committee ever sat, before the last of it was made official in ink and signature. But he died knowing. That was the mercy of it, small as it was, and she carried the knowing back down the mountain with her, like something she'd been asked to keep safe. The reckoning, when it came fast and complete. The mine's supply contract was pulled inside a week, handed to a firm out of Denver with no patience for crooked books. The camp's committee sat 2 full days going through what she and the superintendent laid before them, and by the end of it, there was no man in that room who doubted what had been done, or by whom. The saloon owner did not wait to be told to leave. He sold what little he still owned outright. The bar itself, some barrels, a wagon, for less than it was worth, and by the first thaw of early spring he had gone, west or south, nobody troubled to ask which, and nobody troubled to watch him go. The saloon stood empty a while after that, its windows gray with dust, its sign creaking on one hinge in the wind that came down off the passes. She walked past it sometimes on her way to the mercantile, and did not look long, and did not need to. By April, the ranch ledgers had a different hand in them, and every man who worked the place knew whose it was. She kept the books at a table by the kitchen window, where the light was good in the mornings, and the hands had taken to bringing their pay disputes to her instead of to him, because she settled them faster and without temper. He let it happen. He had never been a man who needed to be the one people came to. The columns balanced now in ways they never quite had before he'd asked her to look at them. She'd found a supplier overcharging on grain within her first week, and a debt long forgiven that should have been collected, and she corrected both without asking permission, because by then, she understood that was the job. He signed what she put in front of him and did not pretend to have read it closely. That too was its own kind of trust. They did not speak of what had happened at the card table that winter. There was no need. It sat between them the way a debt settled sits between 2 men who no longer owe each other anything, quietly and for good. In the evenings she cooked, because she wanted to, not because anyone required it of her, and he ate what she made, without the wariness of a man, waiting to be disappointed. And some nights, they talked until the lamp burned low, and some nights they did not talk at all, and both kinds of evening had come to feel like the same good thing. The miners still greeted her on the road into town, tipping hats they had once barely lifted for her. The camp had not forgotten who saved its winter. She let them thank her and did not dwell on it, because she had come to understand something the saloon owner never had, that a person's worth did not require an audience to be real. It only required someone, eventually, willing to look. She thought sometimes of the woman she had been at that corner table, folding herself smaller, waiting to be handed off like a debt. She did not recognize much of that woman anymore, and did not mourn her either. She had simply been unseen, in a place that made a habit of not seeing women built the way she was built, doing work no one thought to notice until the books came due. Someone had finally noticed. That was the whole of it, not a rescue, not a miracle, just a man who happened to look twice at a ledger, and at her, and found both worth keeping.